Okay, study session number 1. Oh, I already ruined everything. Okay, so let's start with what you need to do in one of your parts for the midterm is know how to graph. So I'll tell you what you get points for. So let's start with the first thing is if you have a grid like this, is what to write on the bottom or the side. Okay, so what you want to be able to do is know what the independent variable is and the dependent variable. So the one that we write, remember that we write in the bottom is the independent variable. And the independent variable is always the thing that we change as the scientist. So in this experiment, we're heating something up. We're making it hotter and hotter and hotter. So we're doing this. So this is the independent variable. And then we are totally watching and measuring the dependent variable. Okay, so the dependent one goes on the side and the independent one goes on the bottom. Okay, so that's the first thing you got to make sure you do so you don't mess that up. If you put them in correctly, you're going to get your graph wrong and you won't get the points for independent and dependent. So make sure you know that. So that's the first thing. So let's write the word temperature down here because that goes on the bottom, and solubility. Now, if you get something on the midterm, if your graph has something, you don't really need to know what this is, okay? It's just graphing. So don't be so scared if it asks you questions about what happens to the solubility. You just have to be able to read your line, okay? So the numbers are going to tell you what happens with solubility, okay? Now, after you write the independent and the dependent variable, you want to make sure the second thing you get points for is making an appropriate scale. So one thing that students do, very common mistake, is they take these numbers and they write them at the bottom like this, 5, 15, 25, okay? That is not making an appropriate scale. An appropriate scale, the numbers will go up by a certain amount. So what you want to do is look for the biggest number, and that means sort of you want to get to 50s somewhere over here. So this grid is not the best for this, but if we go like this, that means each little box is 5. We're going to start at 0, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50. It doesn't have to reach the end. That's fine. We'll say 60, 70. As long as we fit it and they all go up by a certain amount, check. Second, this one goes up to 5. So you kind of want 5 to be somewhere up here. So you could totally skip 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That works too. 6, 7. Great. Okay, so now you just graph. So you probably learned this a long time ago, but just to refresh, so you don't make any dumb mistakes, you go to 5 for temperature, which is here, and you're going to put a dot on 5 for solubility. So you go 5, bam, just like that. Then you go to 15, go to 4.5. So 15 is here, go to 4.5, bam, and so on and so forth. 25 is 4, 35 is 3.5. I totally messed this up, didn't I? I didn't practice. Hold on, 4, oops. I knew it, I knew I would mess up. So this one is 4, 25 is 4, this one's 3.5, 35, 45 is 3. So 45 is 3. And wow, this goes up, it's like a perfect straight line. And 55 is 2.5. Great, now all you have to do is make sure you connect your dots like that. Bam, done. Now, if you're asked to state the relationship between temperature and solubility, just remember we say this one first. So we're going to say as temperature increases, comma, solubility will decrease, or solubility decreases, whichever one. Bam, we got all the points. So make sure you label. Make sure you make an appropriate scale. Make sure you make all the dots, connect the dots. And last, make sure you understand the relationship. Awesome. Okay, great. That's graphing. Let's talk about cells a little bit. So remember, the midterm will ask you, we won't dive too deep, but you have to know the basics for cells. So let me tell you some stuff that might be on the midterm. So the first thing is to know the organelles which are easy to identify. So for example, vacuole usually won't be asked on an animal cell because it's hard to identify. But on a plant cell, the vacuole is huge, so that might show up on your version, okay? So the vacuole is this really large organelle right here, and its job is to store water for the plant. So you can also see it here. This is the vacuole in a plant. To know the difference between a plant and an animal cell, well, the plant cell, they have the rigid cell wall. So if you see a cell wall, it's a plant cell. If you see this like waviness, any kind of cell that has no definitive rigid shape, that's an animal cell. Other things. Okay, organelles. So the nucleus, and know what it looks like and know what the function of that organelle is. So the nucleus is where the DNA is, the genetic code. It also controls the functions of the cell. ER and Golgi are really hard to sort of, make sure that, you understand what we're pointing to, and because look how similar they look. So usually these are ignored, but the ribosomes are not. So anytime you see dots of any kind, no ribosomes. And also the function of ribosomes is so important, so it's usually asked on any kind of bio exam. They make proteins. Okay, so know the ribosomes. Again, the Quizlet's going to help you a lot with all this stuff. So go through your Quizlet a lot. Centrioles are not really on there. That's very nitpicky, but this guy is very famous. This is your mitochondria. So the mitochondria looks like, remember, sort of a bean with all these like little folds and things. But the main thing to know is this is where cellular respiration takes place. And this is the process that our cells do to get energy. So any kind of question with ATP, energy, powerhouse, glucose going in, is all mitochondria. Okay, so know what they look like, know what happens inside there. Goody. Okay, who else we got here? Cytoplasm, not so much. Oh yeah, this guy's big. Chloroplast. Just like the mitochondria, super important. They're recognizable by the stacks, these cool little stacks. And this is the site of photosynthesis. So autotrophs, oh, good word, synthesis. Autotrophs, like plants, absorb sunlight here and they make sugars. Now remember, if you study your Quizlet, it's good to memorize, yes, to know some of the words, but you have to be able to, you have to be adaptable in order to do well on the test. For example, if the sun is going into the chloroplast, well, out we know what comes out of the chloroplast, the product. But you have to be able to know a bunch of different ways to say the same thing. For example, the thing that comes out is glucose. But you also have to know that C6H12O6 is glucose. You also have to know that glucose is a carbohydrate. You also, as an excellent biology student, know that it's a monosaccharide because it's a simple sugar. You also know that it's an organic molecule. Okay, so I think people struggle on tests because they're not able to connect that this is this and this is this, which is this and this and this and this. You know what I'm saying? So you have to be able to know all this. And this is kind of what separates the A's from the B's or the B's from the C's, is people who can connect all these things we learned. Okay? So I don't want to scare you, but remember, proteins, someone can sort of connect the dots and know this is made up of amino acids, which is also a polypeptide. So go through the notes, the little sheet that I gave you. That might help too. So, okay, let's get back on track here. So we have nucleus, vacuole, chloroplasts, mitochondria. Those are big one. Ribosomes. I think that's pretty cool. Oh, the cell membrane. So the cell membrane is what controls what goes in and out of a cell. And remember, if we zoom in on the cell membrane, we're going to see it all as like a little phospholipid bilayer, which is like all these little lipids, like that. Remember? So that's the phospholipid bilayer. This is what allows things to go in and out of the cell membrane. And I think that's pretty good for the cell. Those basics, go through your organelles and what they do. Great. Let's see what's next. All right, a little chemistry. So for chemistry basics. All right, definitely know that this is the periodic table and these are atoms. These are elements. Elements are the simplest things. For example, oxygen. It's the smallest thing that can have, here we go, oxygen, properties, bam. So if we draw oxygen, 8 protons. Inside, we're going to see how many protons we have. The number of protons of an element is known as the atomic number. Okay, the atomic number is the number of protons. Then, if we're doing Bohr models, these will be rings. So basically, the Bohr model for oxygen, the first ring gets 2, and this one gets 6, which gives us 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, so oxygen has a valence of 6. That means valence are the outermost electrons. The outermost electrons. Okay, this is how you write electron with a little negative there. Super. I'm skipping ahead, actually. Let me start over a little bit. So in atoms, you know there's 3 subatomic particles, protons, neutrons, and electrons. Know their charges. Okay. Know that these two connected, protons plus neutrons, gives you atomic mass. So we're saying like, hey, oxygen has 8 protons, and if its mass is 16, you can figure out how many neutrons are on there. Okay, so there's 8. That means there's 8 neutrons. They're not always the same. Be careful. They're totally not always the same. You have to look here at the periodic table to see what the masses are. Okay. Now rounding. So if you have a mass of 78.9, that's going to be 79. Anything that's 5 or more, you just what is it called? Round. Thanks. All right. Let me kill this because it's sloppy. Ions. All right, we have atomic mass, we have atomic number, we have the Bohr models, valence, you know valence now, and charges. So now let's talk about charges. These guys are the noble gases. These guys have no charge. They're free. Just kidding. This means that they do not react with anything else. The reason they don't react is because their outer shell is filled. These guys, the valence shell is filled. Okay, that's the first thing. But these guys are one away from becoming happy, as we said in class. So it's charges. Remember I said if you have a periodic table, just remember that this is minus. These guys are 2 minus. These guys are 3 minus. These guys are plus. These guys are 2 plus. That's all you got to worry about. So if we give you an element like Mg and we ask you to write its charge down, just go to Mg and be like, hey, it's in the second row. That's a 2 pluser. If we give you O, O is here. That's 2 minus, etc., etc. Okay. Next, if you needed to name these or put them together, because these guys, the positives hook up with the negatives in ionic bonds, then remember, just write the letters together and crisscross. So this one and this one, the numbers will 2 plus. This number will go there and this number will go there. Now the thing is, these will cancel each other out because 2 plus and 2 minus, this is what we write for MgO. Do not write Mg2O2. No good. But for example, with lithium and oxygen, Lithium has a charge of plus. And here it is right here, lithium. And oxygen, as we know, has a charge of 2 minus. If you're going to hook those two up, you just say Li. This little 2 goes down here. Woohoo! And this invisible 1 goes down here. Woohoo! Don't write anything. Its name? Lithium oxide. Just practicing my script. All right. To name them, remember, just say the first element and then "ide" at the end for that. So this is called ionic bonding. Bonding. Great. Ions, charges, nothing on covalent bonding except know what it is. So you don't have to, what I mean by that is you don't have to because it was a little bit more advanced when we talked about carbon hooking up with other things like this and all that, the lines, that's not really on the midterm. But ionic bonds are. I think that's it for chem. Protons, neutrons, electrons. The only other thing was isotopes. Isotopes, basically what that is carbon 12. That just means carbon usually has a mass of 12, but you can have an isotope, which is a stranger, a weirdo, carbon 14. What that means is it has 6 protons, but it's a little heavier. Instead of having 6 neutrons, it's got 8 neutrons. It's 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. Yep, that's the mass. So this guy has 8 neutrons. It's an isotope. It's a different version of the normal one. This one has 6 plus 6 is 12. Okay, so that's great. I'll make another video about the body system soon, so that'll help you a little bit. Great, see ya.